From Content 360, this is the state of client acquisition. Welcome to the State of Client Acquisition. This is your host, Michael Bohannes. In today's episode, I'm going to be sharing with you my view of the marketing world post-pandemic for small B2B companies. This is something that solopreneurs have learned to navigate quite successfully. This new world of splitting the funnel into a real conversion funnel and what I call the demand gen pot, where you, to keep with the culinary analogy, you simmer your audience to perfection until they are ready to buy from you, or just simply stay in the pot. That's fine as well. But this new world, many solopreneurs have actually learned to navigate it quite well, but small B2B companies have not. So I keep seeing this in the market when I speak to companies that have been around for quite a long time, and they see their methods of client acquisition, notably paid ads and going to trade shows, conferences and the like, they see the effectiveness of this eroding. They simply have a hard time finding into this new world. And I used presentation that I gave yesterday to a company to explain to them my view of the world, and it was a very useful exercise for me because I myself was able to crystallize my thinking into a coherent narrative, and I shared it with them, and I'm very excited to be now sharing this with you on the State of Client Acquisition podcast. So I made this as a LinkedIn Live, so sometimes I make references to slides. Don't worry, you will absolutely be able to understand even if you are only listening. But if you're watching this as well, you'll get the additional benefit of slides and a couple of visuals that I've created. So without further ado, let me get into my take on the new world of post-pandemic marketing for small B2B companies in this episode. Hey everyone, so I thought I would do a little bit of an experiment and share a presentation that I gave yesterday to a prospective client, because it was quite a good exercise in crystallizing my thinking about what is happening to client acquisition in the post-pandemic world. I call it the funnel and the pod. And the interesting thing was, I normally don't give presentations like these to prospective clients because we just have a quick chat and then we see if we are a good match and if we can collaborate. But this time around, I really felt compelled to put this into a coherent framework, to crystallize my thinking, because that client, the potential client in question, they were not at all prepared for this. Like they're a relatively old school tech company in Israel. They've been very much ensconced in their respective niche. And so they just completely rely on their network, and for them doing content is a pretty new territory. So I thought I'm gonna summarize this for them, what the new world looks like, because many solopreneurs, and you probably are one of them if you're following me, if so far this is my main audience, many solopreneurs are already quite familiar with this world where you are basically just interacting really closely with your prospective target clients. You publish a lot of content, and as a result, you get inbound leads. And this is a world that for solopreneurs is very common, coaches, consultants, and the like. But for small B2B companies, let's say 10 people, 20 people, who have been in business for quite a long time, in my experience, they are quite discombobulated by this entire world, right? By creating a podcast, by putting out content on LinkedIn, and maybe even Facebook, like the more fancy and the more youthful the social networks become, the more scared they are of these social networks, which is perfectly understandable. If you've been in business in B2B, for you a social network is something icky that people use that want to waste their time. But I realized while talking to this company and agreeing to give them this presentation, I was thinking this could be really useful for everyone in my audience, because it was really genuinely useful for me to think through this, to create this kind of presentation, and to crystallize my thinking around what has been changing in the last 1.5 years since we started, on this journey of the pandemic, and how B2B client acquisition has changed. Okay, so without any further ado, let's get right into it. I call this new world the funnel and the pot. Some people speak about a split funnel. I used this term as well, but the more I was thinking about it and the more I was creating this presentation, I realized, geez, is actually not a split funnel, because the other side, sure, split funnel means you just create a funnel for those people in your target audience who are ready to buy, who have enough problem and pain awareness and are ready to buy. And the other side is for those people who are not yet ready to buy, and you just nurture them and give them good content. That, however, is not a funnel. You're not trying to get them through a journey. That is the point of a funnel. You start at the top and end up at the bottom. But those who are just consuming your content, they're not in a funnel. And that's why I use the analogy of a pot. But I'm going to get into this more as we go along. Okie doke. So let's get right into it. So in this presentation, I'm going to be talking about an emerging way of client acquisition for B2B companies. And that is the funnel and the pot, the conversion funnel for the 5% of potential clients who are pain aware, problem aware, and are considering to act actually, and at least get on the phone with you. And the other side is the demand gen pot, right? This is the part where you're just serving them content. Okay, so very high level, what is the funnel and the pot? Not many B2B companies, as I have mentioned, mastered it, and that is a competitive advantage for yourself. If you've been in business for a long time and are seeing your current methods of client acquisition decline and go down in effectiveness, most notably outbound, but also running ads to lead magnets and this whole spiel, then you being able to incorporate the funnel and the pod methodology in your company will be a competitive advantage. And also the reason, as I already hinted at, the reason it is difficult for companies to incorporate is because it amounts to a wholesale DNA change in your company, right? Very often the typical reactions and the kind of by default interactions with the market tend to be on the sales side, right? So whenever you see somebody who fits your client persona, boom, you just swoop in on them and treat them to a good dose of outbound barrage, be that email or on the phone. And that is, of course, probably not such a good idea, especially in this new world where people are so much more empowered to make their own decisions and have researched the field before they're willing to have a sales conversation. So it is a wholesale DNA change for a company, and it just takes time to effectuate it. Okay, the key elements of the funnel and the pod methodology are, first of all, understand where and how buying decisions get made. And that is a really new world for most people. Second is create separate paths for high intent leads versus low and no intent audiences. It's very important that people who land on your website, who land on your LinkedIn profile, that they really know who you are talking to, what is your offer, and that's very clear, and they know exactly how they can communicate with you. And on the other hand, for those people who are not yet ready to buy, that you create this kind of friendly pot environment. Then, of course, optimizing the sales path with great conversion-oriented content. That is the funnel element. And then nurturing the audience with quality content. That's the pot, and building relationships at scale. Final element is abandoning high-volume lead collection, MQL method. And last but not least, treating cold outbound as a transition until brand equity drives sufficient momentum. For most companies, outbound, starting doing cold email, just contacting people out of the blue, will stay important. They will probably not get away from it, but the less you can do of it, because your brand is creating so much more awareness, the better for you. Ultimately, it's going to be. Okay, so let's just start really high level. After I've kind of just sketched it, what is the funnel and the pod methodology? Let's think about what are the methods for client acquisition that are available for small B2B companies. Let's just brainstorm them and see what methodologies we can come up with. And I've created some of them, and I've sorted them by increasing client acquisition costs. So first of all is word of mouth, everything that has to do with referrals, networking, the connectedness of the founder, board, CXOs, investors, and the like. Then the next one is organic marketing, which includes content and communities such as SEO, content assets, book, video series, webinars, and so on, and being present on LinkedIn. Then there's the whole space of institutionalized networking, all these things like networking companies, business networking, international BNI, industry associations, and so on. Those kind of places where you just pay, and the idea is that you join them, you network with people, and they hopefully refer you to people that they know, and you refer them. I've never heard of anyone for whom this has worked in a significant way. Sure, the occasional 1 or 2 clients here and there, but no one that I know has actually had much success with it. Let me know if this is different for you. But it is part of the mix that some companies use. Okay, let's look at events. That includes virtual, of course, organized by others. That is everything from industry conferences, trade shows, meetups, and so on. Everything that is organized by others and you usually pay to join, or organized by yourself, which only the larger of the small B2B companies can actually afford to do. And then there's paid advertising. And again, we're rising up the ladder in client acquisition costs. So it gets more and more expensive the more down we get on the list. Paid advertising is usually done using the MQL method: ad, lead magnet, email sequence, sales call. And then there's cold sales, which is pretty much rounds it off. So my question, did I forget anything? Let me know in the comments to this video if I have forgotten anything. So, and here's the point, like think back to the last 3 major business purchases you've made in your company, depending on your size, whatever is large. For smaller companies, it would be, let's say, 5 or 10K plus. If you're a bigger company, 20, 30, 50K plus. When you think about that, what was your path to purchase? How did you buy? What was the actual path? My hypothesis is that, and pretty much everybody who I've spoken to about this has confirmed it, that these kinds of methods that I outlined, like the business networking international, the ad to lead magnet to email sequence and so on, all of these methods are getting less and less prevalent. And instead, what is becoming much more important is word of mouth and content. I would be willing to bet that for the majority of you who are listening, if you think back to your last major purchase, if not the last one, then maybe the last 3 ones, there was at least one of them where you were strongly influenced by this person's free or this company's free content, and or that you were referred to them by someone else, but who genuinely thought that they were good, who had used them themselves, not because they were expecting some tit for tat, some quid pro quo kind of referrals. Okay, and that is the point. That is the new world that we live in, and it makes it all much more complicated because it's less easy to predict who's going to become your client. So this goes very much hand in hand with how the COVID lockdowns have changed the world of client acquisition for small B2B companies. There are 4 trends that the lockdowns have sparked and accelerated, and let's cover them now. So first of all, there's online first, events last. It's not a surprise. Everybody knows that. Even senior executives, LinkedIn skeptics, and determined handshakers are now online. And a partial reversal is, of course, possible as we learn to live with COVID and events are returning. But these 1.5 years so far of online only, they will have a long-term effect. And the events will return, but probably won't find back to their old levels of popularity. Then the second major trend is greater buyer sophistication and a premium on trust and decline of outbound and classic lead gen. Buyer sophistication is really up. And that's why it's because everyone has become digitally fluent. Everybody in the business world who wants to in any way connect with clients, I mean, unless they are a engineer who are deep down buried in their topics, don't want to really communicate with anyone unless it's with their supervisor. They need to be online. They need to be active. They need to be communicating. And so everybody has become digitally fluent, even senior people. And because in all at once, everybody got online, that's why they got all hyper connected, and they have access to their trusted peers from the past and the present. And this has resulted in a massive spike of communication. If you are someone who has so far not been very active, for example, on LinkedIn, and suddenly you are forced to go online, you have the similar effect to what you had in the 2000 from 2007 onward. I'm sure you remember this when you went on Facebook and you connected with people who you haven't spoken to for 10, 15, 20 years. The same effect now happened with COVID on LinkedIn, where executives who have not so far been active on LinkedIn now have done that and see, oh my God, this person who I worked with 10 years ago is on LinkedIn. Let's chat, let's connect with them. So that has been a major impact. This has been a major influence of the lockdowns. And then as part of that, also a rise of groups and communities. Of course, LinkedIn is very noisy, especially if you are a sought after person. You get pitched a lot, and therefore Many of them have retreated into groups and communities, relatively small groups, where the chance that they will get pitched by some stranger are relatively low. And so these groups and communities have risen up, be that Slack channels, be that Facebook groups, and so on. And that has, of course, allowed, given this connectedness, easy vetting of products and services. People simply have a connectedness with their peers. So what's going to be the first question if they need to hire, let's say, a freelancer, if they need to hire an SEO agency? Well, they will ask who their peers recommend, and then they will go with that person. So that has been a strong element as well. Then, as a result, premium is being placed on trust and word of mouth. This is now the way how people decide on which services or products they will purchase. As a result, buyers become more sophisticated and research products and services before ever appearing on a company's radar. As a result, again, this decreased effectiveness of outbound and conversion-oriented paid ads. And I'm going to present this later with a hopefully very evocative schematic, why that is the case. Simply, people are researching this stuff, they get their recommendations from their peers, and once they have it, then they simply say, okay, thank you very much, and I'm now going to contact the company. And somebody else who's not been in the running doesn't have a chance. And the product and service discovery now happens in the dark funnel. This is point number 3. And this is a term coined by Chris Walker, who has elaborated on this particular topic in a recent podcast episode of this. And this has kind of sparked also my thinking, applying this to small B2B companies. Chris is mainly talking to larger companies, but the same applies to small ones. And what is the dark funnel? This is my definition. Chris has coined the term, but this would be my definition. It's an emerging process through which B2B buyers increasingly decide what product and service they will buy. And it is facilitated through a web of informal interactions among trusted peers and quality content that educates, informs, and entertains. So it's all about 2 things. Number 1 is the interaction the relationships that you form with people in the dark funnel, and the content that you are publishing once they have interacted with you a little bit and want to find out more about you. Those 2 things are making an impact in the dark funnel. And as I mentioned before, once you have made up your mind, once you have sort of formed an early opinion, only then you will contact the company who you want to possibly work with. So only at the end of the funnel, it says, hi, I'm interested in your product, let's talk. This is often the first time the prospect shows up on a company's radar. And 4th element that the pandemic has engendered is that content has become an absolute must. There is no better way to win trust than, aside from networking without expecting anything in return, is to publish high quality content that solves people's problems. Even long form, intellectually challenging content has been mainstreamed. It's not just about the quick snippets, right? You can, what's the most popular podcast right now? Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan does 2, 3, 4 hours episodes, very often with quite advanced, intellectually challenging topics, right? Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris are filling up auditoriums of 15,000 people discussing philosophy. So even long form content has been absolutely mainstreamed. And as a result, the professional media arm of non-media companies has become a competitive advantage, right? If you are just publishing the occasional LinkedIn post and don't, for example, have a video practice at all, you are not publishing any other formats, you just post the occasional post, you will pretty easily get sidelined soon by your competitors. So there is an absolute arms race. And also because, of course, B2B social networks are becoming saturated, you need to stand out. And the fascinating thing, and this is one that especially is important for small B2B companies, is to understand that content builds actual relationships at scale. I've had this with several instances of when I connected with a prospect, they told me, it feels like I've known you because I've been watching every video and listening to every podcast episode of yours. And that is fascinating because they know me. I don't know them at all, but they have a pretty high degree of trust with me because they've heard me talk about so many things. They've even heard me address maybe some personal elements of my life, nothing too close, nothing too personal. I know that this is something that many small B2B companies are always wary of. Oh my God, will I have to start publishing the proverbial cappuccino pictures in the morning in my breakfast table? No, you won't have to, but sometimes simply mentioning something that is happening in your personal life and how this has an impact on your business, that builds relationships with people. Why should you separate these two things extremely? There's no good reason. And so to understand that relationship building has been so far so important to you, and that's a great thing, right? Especially this company that I was talking to yesterday, they have a great track record of being successful with building relationships in their market and becoming sort of an inevitable force in their small home market. But now that they're expanding into the outside world, they need to see, okay, yes, sure, we could just continue building relationships in real life, but there is a way to scale this. And content is an absolutely legitimate way and really effective way to build real relationships. It's not just the illusion of a relationship or something like that. It is real relationships at scale. Okay, and then LinkedIn and other B2B social networks become saturated. There is an arms race in content quality. So this is something that I mentioned before. As these social networks become more and more crowded, you need to stand out and create better and better content. So my question to you now is, do you agree with these 4 propositions, these 4 changes that the lockdowns have engendered? And if not, why? Okay, so this is, just to repeat, online first, events last. That was point number 1. Point number 2, greater buyer sophistication, a premium on trust, and a decline in outbound and classic lead gen. Point number 3, product and service discovery now happens in the dark funnel. And point number 4, content has become an absolute must. And so quickly going back to this topic, if you don't agree, I would love to know why. Please, you can mention it in the comments below this video or just message me. I would really love to know where you disagree with this, especially if you are someone who has been running a successful B2B company, your old methods of client acquisition are losing its effectiveness, but you disagree with these things, then I would genuinely be interested in where specifically you disagree and why this would not apply to you. Okay, so now let's get a little bit more into the topic of the dark funnel, because this is the most complicated thing to understand, and also to put it in context with that earlier picture that I used, the funnel and the pot. Like, how do these things all connect? And after this, I hope this is going to become clear. So the way to learn and to have influence in the dark funnel, you need to do this. You need to, first of all, be present and active in these informal networks. LinkedIn is good to start understanding your target audience. The problem with LinkedIn is that, and maybe some other smaller social networks for the business world, is that very often people won't really be genuine and honest about their challenges. Simply, the forum is too broad. A potential post or comment where they are admitting to some challenge, some problem that they have, is just so large that many people don't want to show vulnerability. However, they are much more willing to do so in a group of 100, 150 people, most of whom are, relatively trusted. They are willing to openly admit that, hey, I've had this specific challenge with my mindset, for example, or, hey, guys, we have real cash flow problems and so on. Could you recommend what would you do? These kind of almost peer-to-peer groups where people are willing to open up a little bit. So if you manage to enter one of those groups, there you have to really be present, active, and listen, provide value. This is absolutely not the place to pitch, but this is the place where you can really generate ultimate customer insight. And then also publishing quality content that helps your audience solve problems and observe what resonates. Like, truly adding value in these groups is absolutely essential. And then be willing to forego attribution. Right? There is zero attribution in these places. You will not know where, you will not be able to say after a year, okay, we've got 7 clients, which we all got from the dark funnel, and exactly these type of specific actions triggered them to become clients. That just won't happen. Okay, and so as a result of the dark funnel, we need a clear split: conversion funnel and demand gen pot. This is where it comes in. So the people who in the dark funnel who clearly manifest themselves as that they are someone who's looking for a solution to their problem and they would be willing to work with you. For them, you don't even nudge them while you're in the dark funnel with them, but they will at some point check you out. If you say something intelligent to them in a comment, for example, or you send them a DM where you support them in one of their challenges, they will come and check you out. They will look at your website and they will come and see your LinkedIn profile. And in that scenario, you need to have a very good, very clear, coherent story from beginning to end. Hey, this is what we do. This is who we help. These are the problems we help our clients solve. Have a very clear value proposition and guide them down the path. And for the other group that are not yet ready to act, who are not yet very problem aware, you just produce great quality content. And of course, it's a bit meta. This is my way trying to articulate what is happening in this world. This is my way of sort of stirring the demand gen pot. And the reason why I use pot, and I don't want to stretch the analogy too far, but it's essentially you just putting in the ingredients and then you cook them to perfection over time. The idea is that when somebody is in your pot, in your content orbit, this is when they start slowly simmering and thinking, this person has actually some interesting things to say. Like somebody who has been on my email list for a while and regularly sees my content on LinkedIn, and I know who these people are, of course, they are in my pot. And I regularly see, for example, one email resonates particularly well with them. And I see this because they've opened the email 10 times. I see this in my email marketing software. And that is great because I can see, these people are really, really interested. And I could, of course, when this happens, I could start a conversation and say, hey, I can see that you are, really engaged with my content. Is there something I could help you with? But that, of course, could create an anti-incentive to keep engaging with my content. So I need to be very, very careful in how I do this. But I hope that this is clear. You get the distinction between conversion funnel and demand gen pot. And here's the thing why many companies see their client acquisition cost rise and outbound be more and more challenging. It's because of this. So this is an image, if you're only listening, then you have to imagine somebody entering the dark funnel, which is this jumble of unclear communication paths, where people are in various different social networking groups, small communities, and subscribe to all kind of different newsletters, and these type of influencers are bombarding them from all sides. They're entering this world. And after being in it for a while, they realize that company A, company B, and company C would be good candidates for them to help them solve their problems. And they develop a certain affinity towards them while they're in the dark funnel. And what then happens is that company D, who is not playing this game, who is trying to do the standard outbound or paid ads driven ebook download and email sequences game, that they then approach them and they have just no chance. Because the person who emerges from the funnel has already a preformed opinion. They want to be together with, or they at least have a strong affinity towards company A, B, or C. So they will buy from one of them. And company D simply has no chance. And so in contrast, what's the ideal conversion journey? Where does now your role start to come in here? Well, it's here. The person enters the funnel again. And while they're in the dark funnel, you provide them with the demand gen pot, with the content pot. You put them in the pot, and what specifically does that mean? For example, they're in a group and they mention that they have a challenge with something specific, okay, and so on. And you simply provide an answer. You provide a potential solution. Like the other day, somebody on LinkedIn mentioned that they don't know how to curate their LinkedIn newsfeed. So I provided a lengthy comment explaining to them exactly my methodology for curating my newsfeed. This person is in my demand gen pot. He's not yet ready to act. He does not have problem awareness enough, but I gave him a great answer that I hope he will appreciate. And with this, over time, maybe he will become a client, but maybe not. I don't expect him to. This is just simply my part of adding value, and other people will see this as well. They will see my, hopefully going to be perceived as generosity with providing my insights, and then they will form a good opinion of me. And that is the beauty of the dark funnel, but there is no attribution to that. Imagine somebody else sees my comment, thinks, this guy has something interesting to say, let me check him out, goes on my profile, checks out my website, and schedules a call. I have no idea, unless I ask this person, I have no idea that this particular comment triggered this client. And I recently had this, a new client joined, and she actually told me that it was one of my comments that made her interested. But that is a rare case of very clear attribution. She could not specifically pinpoint which comment that was. She didn't tell me that, but she said it was one of your most recent comments. So if I had gone back and researched this, I could have presented her with 5, 6, 7 different comments that I had made. And she would then tell me, oh yeah, it was this one. But I don't need that. I'm not that particularly interested in it. I just know that my form of commenting works, that people come to me because of my comments. And so that is a classic way of how you build relationships in the dark funnel. And over time, of course, the influence becomes bigger and bigger until the person, once they are sort of emerging from the dark funnel and are ready to take action, they think about me. They think about, this person has helped me so much. I just want to figure out, almost that they say, I have such a strong affinity to them. Let me figure out how to work with them, because I do want to have more of them in my life. And this is then really where company D comes in and just starts shouting at them. They have no chance. They have no chance to penetrate, because the relationship that I have formed with that person is already so strong. Okay, and then for them, it's a very simple thing to enter my funnel and convert. And so what are the specific requirements for B2B client acquisition for small B2B companies post-COVID lockdowns? Now, we've been discussing this very abstractly. What does that mean for your own marketing operations? First of all, we need to understand, this needs to be this DNA change inside the company. We need to understand that more than ever, the customer is in charge. They do their research about you before talking to you as a prospect. They do that maybe via Google, maybe via some comparison sites, but also they do that via peers. And that means that word of mouth and long-term relationship building are extremely important. And I don't mean to say that you should drop all your short-term client acquisition methodologies. It probably will not be possible, because otherwise you will not be able to hit your goals. There is a really long ramp-up period in this. Like, just to give you an idea, I started posting almost daily on LinkedIn in, I think, September or October 2019. And I still do a little bit of outbound, but this year is the first time where the majority of my clients who've come to me come from my content. It's inbound driven. I still do some outbound to supplement, but it has been now almost 2 years, and I get now a good amount of volume from clients from inbound. So this can take time. You need to expect that. Then customer insights. Actually knowing your target market's pains and problems are paramount and need to be supported by at least weekly, if not daily, conversations with decision makers. And they don't have to be necessarily on phone or on Zoom, but conversation can absolutely be had on DMs, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on other social media platforms, and also in the comments of your posts, their posts, other people's posts. Those are conversations where you will really understand what they need and where they are struggling. Also, we have to build conceptual barriers between sales and marketing, because they really address people with vastly different levels of pain awareness and purchase intent. So that is that, again, funnel versus pod. It's very tempting when somebody is in our pod and we see that they engage a lot, then we start talking to them with the hope of getting them on a phone call. Now, that is perfectly understandable. Many companies do that. But again, you have to understand, the less of this you do, the more and closely people will develop a brand affinity with you. Yes, you will get more clients this way, but the more you can lay this off until later, the more you can defer the gratification, defer the revenue, the stronger this effect will be. Relationship also gets easily destroyed, and word of mouth gets impacted by premature selling. That is what I just mentioned. And then sales needs an optimized conversion journey for the 5%. Marketing needs to focus on demand gen, i.e. building a brand by assembling a dedicated, loyal audience that you educate, inform, and maybe even entertain. Attribution needs to be deprioritized, because much of the influencing happens in the dark funnel. And key, this is where it most often falls down, in small B2B companies, this needs to be a C-level activity. This is not something you can give to the intern, run with it, and just, publish some content on LinkedIn. It won't work. This needs to be done by someone. The actual content needs to be done by someone who is directly credible to the decision makers on the other side. Not only to their deputies and the team that they manage. No, it has to be actually to the decision maker. So if it's usually you, the CEO, who is running sales conversations, it needs to be you, the CEO, also doing content. And this is this big DNA change that is the most difficult one that most small B2B companies don't get, because they think, why I should spend time creating content on LinkedIn? Are you kidding me? Yes. And if you don't do it, then that's fine. But you are then staying in the old world. You're not entering in this new world of client acquisition that the pandemic has accelerated. So what are now the specifics? What should you do in order to enter the new world of client acquisition for small B2B? First, you need to fix the basics. Just make sure that all of these things are in line: positioning, messaging, USP, and offer. The pandemic has done a lot of damage to all kinds of businesses, and we need to see, is our offer still relevant? So we should probably review our metrics, see customer lifetime value development over time. Has it decreased in the most recent past? Have also the conversion rates in the funnel over time decreased? Do we see that from lead from prospect to lead to closed one and so on? How are these conversion rates developing? Then also what I recommend to do, if you feel that these metrics have been going down, or if you know that these metrics have been going down, do some qualitative market research calls with prospective clients. I call them mom test calls after the great book, The Mom Test by Rob Fitzpatrick. These are simply calls where you just try to understand your target market, understand if they are still in the same pain problem position that they were when you were successful with your products and services. Just understand where they are, ask about their past behavior, and so on. Then develop a habit of being active in the communities where your target audience congregates. This needs to become a daily habit. The second major block that you need to do is essentially split the funnel. Create dedicated paths for the 5% high intent people. They go into your funnel versus the 95%, which is everyone else, that go into your content pot. Now, point number 3, optimize the conversion path for the 5%, but understand that it's not just about the call to action. Like, there were several instances where I've created additional resources for people who have entered my conversion funnel, and they've really worked like a charm. For example, what I did with using video, I usually do a 15-minute quick discovery call, and then if we see that there's a possible fit, we schedule a longer call. After the 15-minute call, what I do is I tell people, okay, let's talk in 3 days again, a bit of a longer call. And in the meantime, could I please ask you to watch this 20-minute video where I give people a lot of good information about how we work, what is the methodology that I use, and who I've worked with in the past. On that same page where the video is located, I also have plenty of client testimonials who can attest to the quality of my work. So that is a great way to influence them, and it also polarizes them, because part of the video messages that I send is, hey, and this is how much will be required from you in terms of the time investment. And yes, this is a paid service, so that I can weed out potential people who are like, okay, yeah, that's true, but I just don't have any money, right? Okay, so that in case that this happens and people see this video and they say, listen, it's not a good time now. Okay, perfect, and we all benefit. That is a great element of optimizing the conversion path for the 5%. People are problem aware, they want to act, and I show them a video that polarizes those who are willing to invest versus those who aren't. Okay, this is aside from optimized landing pages. Also make sure you do a sales process review. Can people actually get in touch with one of your sales reps or yourself if you are a small company? Then it's also important to do this kind of process review. And as I just mentioned, dedicated content streams for prospect at different parts of the funnel. And another thing that I've recently started implementing, and I'm seeing very good signals from this, is email nurture sequences for people who I've had interacted with as part of my conversion funnel. Specifically, when somebody tells me, I need to think about it, they receive my offer and they tell me I need to think about it for a few days. Then I schedule a quick follow-up call 5 days later. And in the meantime, I send them an email drip sequence where I give them further information, further, more detail. Okay, this is what our collaboration would look like, so that I influence them and nudge them into converting. Okay, and now this is the thing where the biggest DNA change will occur, which is to create a media arm of your company that continuously creates truly good content and generates demand and brand affinity as a result. And I'm going to cover this in the next slide. That's why I highlighted it in this color. If you are only listening, don't worry, it's just coming. Number 5 is assess if you need outbound to hit your goals. And if you do, if you cannot wait for the revenue to come in several months from now, and I would expect in the best case scenario, something like 6 months, that you just really invest in this, you build up your brand, you get many people into the pot, and after a while, some of them will convert. If you cannot wait for at least 6 months with just your existing client acquisition methods, then yes, do indeed incorporate some outbound into your client acquisition. And if you don't need outbound, then just focus fully on this. And so the biggest mindset shift, this biggest DNA change occurs in step 4, content, right? The company I spoke to yesterday, for them, it will be a very big step, but they were very open to it, right? They say, okay, we need to do this, but the way how they will have to make this change happen, that's going to be tricky, right? Because most people, for example, have this reflexive way of putting out sales messages that they sort of disguise as content. I'm sure you've seen this, something like 7 good reasons why you should work with us. Okay, that's not content. That is you being salesy here. And to get away from this type, even to think, okay, I'm not going to be saying 7 reasons why you should work with us, but 7 reasons to do the thing that we do. For example, 7 reasons to do SEO. Okay, and if that is part of your messaging, then it's fine to do it from time to time, but the core focus, the core thrust of the content needs to be to solve problems, not try to talk people into doing something, but actually to address real problems that people have. So point number 1 is, as a requirements of step 4, which is creating a media arm, creating good content, is no sales message allowed, and the content is purely to educate, inform, and possibly entertain. Don't try to convert. And the best content comes from actual real-world problems that your decision makers face. And that's why we have the strong focus on being present and active in the communities where they congregate. You need to understand them and speak their language. Approach it really like a media company. The content becomes its own product that has to survive as a legit source of insights in the market. You have to be genuinely interested in what resonates with your target audience. Your content becomes a new product that you have to nurture and get it out into the market. Also, both quantity and quality of content are required. Yeah, it's not just about, oh, I created one big article and I do this once a month. I hear this so often from small B2B. Oh yeah, we're creating an article a month. This is not enough. There has to be daily, especially when you're starting out, there has to be at least twice a week, at least 3 times a week, better daily content that you are publishing. And it doesn't have to be an article daily, but a post where you clearly show that you know what you're talking about. There's no trade-off between quantity and quality. Also, for the content to be effective, the C-level person, ideally the CEO, needs to be in the driver's seat. They should get all the operational support they need, but distilling the market insights, really figuring out what the market wants, so topic selection and content creation needs to be their job. Yes, I mean that you, the CEO, actually sits down and writes a LinkedIn post. Don't delegate this to the junior marketing person. Don't tell the intern to phrase it for you. You need to write this yourself. You need to learn this. Sorry that I'm being quite hectoring here, but this is something that the earlier you jump on that train, the faster and smoother you will transition into this new world. And I understand that this is not something that I can ask you to do on top of your existing obligations, because this is time consuming. I'm asking you to review your existing diary and see what of the current activities you can outsource. There are very few activities I can imagine that are as important as understanding your target audience, understanding your target clients, and serving them with content. The content that will come from you as a CEO will be way better than that of a marketing manager, no doubt. And as I said, the considerable reshuffle of the CXO's daily tasks allocation will be required. This needs to be the top priority for the C-level of the company. And the alternative would be, it's a legit alternative, but it has one big risk, is to hire a dedicated senior person who can credibly communicate with the target market as a peer. The downside of this is, what if they leave? Right? If you hire somebody expressly for this job to create a media arm and who has the trust, the credibility, at least the potential to be credible to your target market, this is especially important for very technical areas. If they do have the credibility, but then after 1, 2, 3 years they leave, then you've built up a considerable amount of brand equity through them, and then they leave. If you're the CEO, or if especially so even the founder, much better in this case. And finally, only self-reported attribution will be possible. There's very little potential for tech-driven attribution. So clearly said, you can ask people, oh, how did you learn about us? But they will not be able to, you will not see in your tech tools of where a specific lead has come from. So how do we now build this media arm in the non-media company? How should you just go about it? What are the steps? First of all, identify a senior person, ideally the CEO or the founder in the company, who is a credible peer to the target audience. Carve out a significant chunk of their time. I say in the beginning should be 50%. Maybe over time it can taper down to 20% of their time to work on content. Dedicate one junior person to support. They will be doing all the content management, content admin stuff. Craft a plausible content strategy. For example, a very simple, probably effective strategy would be you create a podcast where you interview relevant people in your industry and distribute the clips on LinkedIn and Facebook. Or you create a community for junior people who report into your ideal decision maker and help them with their challenges, hoping that they will then recommend you inside the company once you've built up the credibility with them. Number 5 is execute and adapt to what you learn from the market. So once you've formulated your strategy, then execute, do it for a couple of months and see what happened. But don't give up too easily. This stuff does take time. The content strategy needs to be plausible. That's why it's really important that you work with somebody who has experience in this space and where they can tell you if this sounds like a plausible content strategy. So quickly, after all this theory, who is doing this really well? Of course, plenty of small companies, plenty of solopreneurs specifically are doing it. Companies are slower to catch on unless they have been founded recently by someone who has had these type of experience as a solopreneur. But among big companies, who is actively doing this? Well, not big, huge companies are not yet doing this. Mid-sized B2B companies are doing it. For example, Dave Gerhardt, he's the chief brand officer at Drift, a 600 people plus B2B SaaS company. He started a podcast that grew to thousands of listeners. He created a Facebook group of relevant decision makers and is very, very active on LinkedIn. Chris Walker, who I already mentioned, he's the CEO of Refine Labs, a marketing agency. He grew his company to 40 employees with a podcast and LinkedIn content. Mark Bernstein, CEO at Balto, 120 people strong SaaS company as well. There's podcasts, vlogs, and written content on LinkedIn. So it is companies that have already significant traction that have grown considerably with this approach. Final point, what are now, after I've given you all this hard time of what you need to do and how difficult it is to create this DNA change, I'm just acknowledging what I see in the market. But here, let's also talk about the benefits. What will you get out of this when you implement these changes? First of all, you will sense a much greater feeling of control over your client acquisition. You will just simply know that people who come to you when they're inbound, they're so much better to work with. And you will sense this feeling of being in sync with your target audience. You are not chasing after them, but you are in lockstep with them because you are regularly speaking to them in these communities. You're at the forefront of your industry and you're first to hear signals from your market to change your product. This is also very key for product insights, being close to your market. Then finally, you also get more inbound clients, which are best to convert and to work with. Right? Everybody knows that. Whoever has been on sales calls with people you got through outbound versus inbound, the latter are way easier to first convert and then also to work with. And then finally, you build a brand asset which will bear fruit for the long run. So that is it. Thank you very much. I hope this was useful. Let me know what you thought of this and whether this new approach, the pod and the funnel approach, resonates with you. I'd love to hear from you, and thanks a lot for listening. The State of Client Acquisition is a Content 360 production. Music by Gavin Knox-Grant. To sign up for alerts and to submit written and audio questions, go to stateofclientacquisition.com. I'll talk to you in the next episode. Montreal,
girls in the tail end of winter. Caffeine burns, wide awake dreams and color. Blood on my hands in this open heart journey. And infinite numbers, rapid fire across the country. We slide tonight, and the light on the ocean so bright. With my eyes